The tricky balance there is that whether we want order or not, you either self-regulate or there's a regulation that comes from government. But we've all established it, that within your freedom of association is your right to form an organization without necessarily registering.
Right.
Okay. Now, if you have not now registered, you must self-govern. All right. Self-governing also brings us to the conversation, like you said, the self-regulation element. What we are trying in Nigeria at the moment is a code of conduct process where we subscribe to that code of conduct and we peer pressure each other. However, government in Nigeria has also recently came into the terrain where they are proposing, and this has been on since 2012, a code of corporate governance for non-profits. Yes. All right. There has been pushback on the part of civil society. However, the courts have determined that the Financial Reporting Council has the right to give us that code. So now we are engaging with them and saying to them that, yes, this code is fine. It has to be voluntary. Explain or, tell us why comply or explain. That's the nature of that code.
Okay.
The beauty of it, and this again shows the need for us to be prepared, is in other climes, the code of corporate governance was designed and issued by the sector itself, with the regulators just enforcing it. But in the case of Nigeria, it is now being co-designed, as it were, with the sector by the regulator. And what it is looking at is our internal governance. Recall that I had mentioned that whether you want regulation or not, self-governance is part of the characteristics of civil society organizations. So these are the trends that we're seeing in the course of the work that we're doing. But should we self-regulate? I think the time is now to do that.
Many thanks indeed, my brother. And I'm going to come back to you at a point to ask you about how civil society should respond to laws and policies and practices that, civil society thinks is repressive. Because I heard you say in the first panel you participated in that the civic space is a marketplace, and I couldn't agree more. And in a marketplace, you're always negotiating, but thank you. So please hold on to that thought, because I'm going to ask you to speak to it before you have to leave us. Now, part of what we've heard, through the last few days in terms of contributions in this room would include matters like, we need to close ranks. We need to collaborate. I think I heard a brother say something like co-opetition. In other words, there will be positive competition, but there must also be collaboration. And we know that this is something very important. We've also heard said that we need to look inwards. So that collaboration is a huge resource, but also looking inwards in another way around understanding local philanthropy. It's so very important, because we know that there are other actors in the civil society space beyond just NGOs. I would like to come to my sister, Nana, our one and only Executive Secretary of WACSI, to our Executive Director of WACSI, to ask you, Nana, how should we collaborate? What does collaboration look like realistically on the ground? Are we being too over-ambitious? How do we raise these local resources that we want to raise? And again, let me close with a controversial question for you as well. Should we be thinking of working with the military to better understand who we are and what we do? Do you have a mic?
Let me use this one. There's one thing that has come up a lot, is that we need resources. Over and over again, we've talked about that. The challenge, though, is that for many of us, the resources that we depend, particularly financial resources, come from external donors. And we have talked, endlessly about all the challenges connected with that. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, if we want to look at a sustainable sector that it enables us to do what we need to do to respond to the civic space, can we continue to depend or be so dependent on external donor funding? The answer is no. And we were talking about how other, particularly INGOs, etc., have, they are able to respond. And I'm on the board of Oxfam GB. They have shops, and they get a lot of their unrestricted funding from these shops. They have individual donors who give money, if it's £1, whatever, they are always giving. They have high net worth individuals who have legacy. They give money, but they also have in their wills. Some people will their money to Oxfam. So they have these kinds of strategies to raise funds that are not connected to what they call institutional funding, or the funding that we get from philanthropies, which have their restrictions. So perhaps we need to be asking ourselves, because we give in Africa, we give a lot. Why is our giving not being, why are we unable to channel some of our giving towards the kind of work that we do in social justice and defending our democracy, for example? And I think those are some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. And there are some reasons for that. If we come to our high net worth individuals, for example, for many of them in many of our countries, the biggest employer is government. And many of our high net worth individuals work with government. Their companies work with government. And so they are uncomfortable when they have to give some of their funding into causes that may be confrontational to government. So we have to think as civil society, because I believe strongly that our high net worth individuals also want the kind of peace and security in our country so that they can do their business and get the money that they need. How can we find a way of perhaps anonymizing the high net worth individuals who would want to support the work that we are doing, which may be seen as confrontational to government? Is there a way that we can think of a strategy? And I believe it is possible. If we put our minds to it, we could come up with certain ways of engaging high net worth individuals who would want to contribute towards this work to address the democracy challenges that we are facing. I think that when it comes to individual giving, we have to take advantage of technology. And people are giving a lot using crowdsourcing these days. So what are some of and maybe when colleagues like Petras Bites and others come to give their, talk about their work, we would hear a bit more about this. How can we use these kinds of platforms to raise money to address, for example, the issue that what is happening in Niger currently? What are some of the things that we can do to address these? So that is one other area. When it comes to us as civil society, I think we also need a mind shift. We have to look at ways, because there are some of us, not all civil society organizations, but there are some civil society organizations that actually offer services that could have certain commercial aspects, connected to it, so that you could raise funds, you could have a social enterprise of sorts, using some of the services that you offer to then feed back the money into the work that you are doing. Some of us could also offer consulting services as sites. Some of us could have, in fact, I do know a number of organizations in Southern Africa and also in East Africa who have guest houses that they run, and they have certain different, projects that they run, which raises money for them to put back into their work. I would speak to collaboration. Then finally, I want to speak about building assets for civil society organizations. assets, and that one would be looking at your own office so that you stop paying rent, and other assets that could, the organization could use. But I also think that we should think about things like having investments. So you build reserves, and that means having a conversation with your donors to be able to give the kind of funding that would give you'll be able to, claw some back to build reserves, invest, and be able to, have some funding that supports the work that flexible funding that you are able to do. In addition to the advocacy that we are doing about shifting power, shifting more resources to local organizations, all of that is a package. But I think we ourselves have to think differently in the way that we work. And on collaboration, critical. We cannot do this work alone. We cannot continue to work in silos. And collaboration continues to be one of our biggest challenges, because very often we are competing instead of collaborating. We want to be seen as the organizations doing the work instead of working together to look at the costs. And I believe that perhaps, again, it's connected to resources, because the more you are seen to be doing the work, the more the donors see you and give you the money. That is true. That may be true. But I also believe that if we are able to work together, bringing our strengths, because we don't have everything, let's complement each other. Then I can lean on your strength.
Absolutely.
And you can take care of where I'm weak as well. And then we can together address the issue. So let's look at the work that we are doing in our strengths. Mm-hmm. And focus on our strengths.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you, my sister. Yeah. You're going to have another 5 minutes. That's why we're trying to use time as effectively as we can. And I know in your next 5 minutes, I would like you to focus on, the subject of Niger and then Gabon yesterday. Should we be sharing a public statement or our thoughts in terms of what is happening there? I mean, this is a civil society week. So what are we going to be taking away? And that dimension of working with the military, I would want you to also think about that. But you stopped on a very important note about building our strengths and looking at collaboration. And I'd like to come to you next, Gad, because Gad, you're a peace practitioner. You're a human rights and gender rights advocate. And we had a session on intergenerational conversations and building trust and working together. What are some of those resources and tools and opportunities and policies that we need to begin to explore in terms of how we work with our young people? And to front load again, another question, which you might take now or later. Again, something that came out of this conversation the last few days, and that's the fact that elections are being weaponized. And sometimes civil society in its heterogeneous nature plays a role in there. And at the end of the day, the judiciary decides some of these elections rather than the votes of the people. So another controversial question to you, or potentially controversial, how should we engage the judiciary? Should we engage the judiciary at all in your work as Cleen, or should we not? Your 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I'll try to respond to each of the questions briefly. First, talking about intergeneration, we cannot be talking about the future if we don't have the present. And having the present means that we need to mentor those that are coming after us. Some persons mentor us to be where we are today. And the mentorship needs to be deliberate and intentional. You need to give them responsibility. You need to follow up with them. You need to assure them they are capable of doing it. So some level of self-confidence need to be installed, and to ensure that they feel comfortable doing that and they have a voice of their own. And doing that means that we must be able to accommodate their excesses, to say that, look, you're not perfect, but you need to be deliberate and intentional. For example, in Cleen Foundation, we have a deliberate internship program, where after every 6 months, we encourage people to apply, and we support them for 6 months, allow them to be part of our travel activities, report writing and proposal writing and all of these. And then they are able to move on their own to establish themselves, hopefully, and be able to sustain what they've been able to learn from us and take it over. We create opportunity for people doing NYC to come serve with us too. And all of these are deliberate effort to build a future generation because we're mindful of the fact that the more we are, the merrier for all of us, and a lot better for the engagement. Now, we cannot be talking about the future too if there are no deliberate policies that we need to have in place to protect each and every one of us. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons why the CSO is functioning and running is because there are gaps in governance and what government need to do. If government is 100% working today, CSOs may not be talking about health, water, good governance, security, and all of this. So all of these gaps that we have is because either government is not doing what they need to do, or deliberately they are avoiding what they need to do. So influencing government policy at every level is critical, because if we're able to influence this, all of their policies, and insist that government do the right thing, is going to reduce pressure on us and ensure that government is performing. Policy in every angle of human endeavor. We talk about election. Why are elections not working? Why are we having coups all over African countries? Is because people are not happy with what we call good governance, or even some level of governance. Civilian in government run government with a lot of impunity. People don't have access to water, no health facilities, no security, no nothing. And so people now are forced to ask themselves this question: what's the difference between a military government and a civilian government? And when you run to the judiciary, in the last election in Nigeria, the popular saying "go to court" means that people think that even when you go to court, people are able to influence the court in such a way that the result does not favor the right person. During the last the National Assembly tenure, I think Bulkachua also was talking about how he was influencing his wife, and then the Senate president shut him down. That was a no-no. And up to now, nobody have made any strong statement to say why was he not asked to come and justify or explain himself better.
Do you want to put a context to that? Who his wife is and why that was a no-no?
Yeah, the wife was a former Supreme Court judge, yeah. And she was sitting, she sat on several, appeals, either for presidential election, National Assembly election, and all of this. And so she was very powerful at that time. I'm thinking she's still powerful because I know they could influence things from the background. And so for her husband to say that he was seeking for favor from her, which ordinarily should be okay because they are husband and wife, but you cannot seek for favor for national issues and issues that influence the lives of generality of Nigeria. And I think that that's where we need to hold the judiciary accountable. That if the people do not think the judiciary will serve that purpose, it means that you're asking people to take the laws into their hands. And once that happens, you start seeing another round of coup. You start seeing people hitting the street protesting. You start seeing assassination. You start seeing politics of do or die, because people think that they need to do everything humanly possible to win that election. So I think that ensuring that we have free and fair election is a responsibility for all of us, because if people elect leaders, and if the leaders are truly elected, the leaders are going to be people-centered. They are not going to be accountable to a godfather or a godmother. They are not going to be accountable to a few cliques or a cabal, but they are going to be accountable to the people, and therefore government will work for the common good. So I see that as a strong connection between the issue of our ability to influence policy, the issue of good governance, the issue of election, judiciary, and even intergenerational response to all of these are interconnected, and we need to have it right to be able to move to where we want to see ourselves. Thank you.
Absolutely. Many thanks. And let me just say that we're going to be coming to the audience shortly, online and in the room. We want this to be as participatory as possible, because we've all been together in this conversation. We've heard excellent contributions made the last 2 days into today being the third day. So if there are questions or comments or suggestions by way of policy, by way of tools, resources, ideas, policy moments that you think we should be thinking about, please get ready, because we're coming to you in the next 5 minutes or 6 minutes. But first, I'm going to come back to my panel, and I'm going to ask my colleague, well, I call her my colleague because, the Open Society Foundation and MacArthur Connection as donors. And I would like to ask my sister Denise Mubaiwa. Let me begin with a controversial question rather than end with it. We as development partners and donors, are we helping the civil space, or are we hindering it sometimes? Are there lessons we're learning in terms of the way we make our grants, in terms of the way we demand collaboration or encourage collaboration? Have we inadvertently encouraged the assumption that civil society is homogeneous? I wanted to put that out because it's been the elephant in the room going around since yesterday. But, to give you the space to talk about ideas that we know are already there, to bring the intellectual content and the learning, you are a learning expert and lead at OSF, to bring learning into the process and the work that we do, not just as civil society, but as, players within the civic space. So let me give you your 5 minutes to approach this from whatever angle you feel comfortable doing so. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll say as the donor, or at least as philanthropy, we try our best to support the sector. We believe in the sector. We believe that without civil society, we technically cannot achieve any democracy. And that's why for many years, I'll speak for Open Society, we've been doing a lot of work in strengthening the sector. So like, for example, I'll speak for Osiwa. While it was still under Osiwa, we are now Open Society Africa. They have they supported the starting of WACSI, and seeing this WACSI where it is right now, it makes us feel proud that WACSI is becoming a space that is mobilizing and strengthening the sector, and being able to run the sector. And we continue to do that, to strengthen the sector to as much as we possibly can. We do have our limitations. As we all know, where our funding comes, it has restrictions. And I'm actually quite proud to hear what Nana is saying, that maybe we should start rethinking what is more sustainable for civil society. And maybe just touching into, and I suppose also as funders, we are now thinking that, as much as we might want to fund and continue supporting the sector, we also do not have enough resources to do the work that we need to do. We would ideally love to work across the board on everything, but also coming to swallow the bitter pill that we cannot save all the world's problems, right? But what we can do is we can try, we can support the sector to stand up and fight for themselves. And another area that I think it would be quite great to start already thinking of is thinking around the private sector, right? There's a movement in the private sector, in the impact investors. It's just starting, that businesses are starting to say we should not only be thinking of profit. We are living in this environment, the same environment that we want to sustain our environment. And if they do not think of the social aspect of things, then it means that it's going to be a doom for all of us. So they are already starting to think around that. And at Open Society, we've also been thinking a lot around from the foundation side, as well as from as an impact investment. So we also have an impact investment arm, which is a Soros Economic Development Fund that actually looks into businesses that are doing social impact. It's a forgiving investor, but it actually gives sustainable funding, but it's for social impact. So I think from a philanthropy side or from the foundation side, it might also be quite good to engage with these impact investors, because these are holders of capital, the insurance companies that, and the, what are they called when you do your retirement and your, yes, the pension funds. They're already starting to think, how can we invest African people's funds for Africa's good, instead of taking those funds to offshores and know that maybe when this person reaches 60, you'll give them the funds. So it's a movement, and I think it will be quite good for the sector to already start engaging in this space. And then also, we're also thinking long-term, right? It's the questions that we ask now that give us the answers or the solutions years later, right? So what we've also been doing is that we're starting a research around a futures research and the systems thinking, that let's sit and ask the right questions right now. What is it that is going wrong? When we're seeing a coup, is it just a coup, or what is the underlying? Let's look at the whole ecosystem. Do we understand how our government functions, the dynamics in government. When we don't understand those dynamics, we just run the risk of dealing with just a small part, but we don't see the impact that we want to see. So like, how can we start looking at a holistic picture and thinking for the bigger picture, and start thinking or planning 10 years in advance? In the event that the civic space is completely closed, what is our plan? And we need to really start thinking of those plans right now. So I would say, like, for Open Society, we are actually trying to implement this, the futures and systems thinking. And we have commissioned a research that is being done by a South African organization called RIASA. And what they are basically doing is that they'll do a research in South Africa and in DRC as the first pilot to see how the systems thinking and futures could actually support the civic space.
Thank you very much. And I hope that in looking at that, we would also explore the changing nature of the civic space, because we seem to be looking at the glass as either half full or half empty. Is it closed or is it open? But, you know, from some of the conversations we've had so far here, it seems that sometimes maybe our lens through which we're looking at the glass might not be very clear. So we can't even see clearly what it is exactly and what the opportunities and the challenges are. So it would be very good to have that, because sometimes, and I think it was my brother Husseini reminding me that the non-governmental organizations were so strong, so powerful, so well-centered, that we think we're the only actors, you know, in the civic space. We are not. There are other important players that we need to center and we need to negotiate with, and we need to think about those emerging movements. I'd like to thank my distinguished panel for this first round of interventions. And as I'd said to you, dear colleagues online and in the room, we want to make this as participatory as possible. So we'd like to come to you, take the first round of questions, take the first round of comments in terms of what you've heard, have your voice added, suggestions in terms of policies and tools or resources you think we should be thinking about. So, je voudrais céder la parole. D'accord. Is that my sister that I see? Shema, is that you? Voila. I have one hand. I have another hand at the table. Ah, mon frère aussi. So we have 4 tables, and we're going to start with the 4 tables. Who is helping us coordinate online? I couldn't join online. I'm sorry. So thanks, my sister. If there's any, just give us a shout out, and please do help remind colleagues online. D'accord, mon frère? Je voudrais commencer avec vous. Je vous cède la parole. Vous avez un micro? D'accord.
Bon, je vais parler en français ici, le calme mettre le casque. Voilà. Bien. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, et merci aux panélistes. Comme on le dit souvent chez nous, la meilleure partie de la sauce est celle qui reste en bas de la marmite. Donc, vous avez bien fait de réserver cette session au dernier jour. Félicitations. Alors, j'ai 2 ou 3 petites questions. Le monsieur qui a parlé de l'autorégulation, c'est extrêmement important pour moi. Pour nous, l'autorégulation, il est à la fois verticale et horizontale. Verticale en ce qui concerne les différents organes et horizontale entre les membres des associations. Or, très souvent, on constate qu'il y a des conflits de leadership qui minent ces associations-là, qui font que la gouvernance est mise en mal. Selon votre expérience, quelles sont les raisons de ce conflit de leadership et comment il faut le réguler pour ne pas que ça porte entorse à l'autorégulation au niveau des organisations? Nana, je te remercie beaucoup par rapport au problème de financement, parce que le tendon d'Achille des organisations, c'est au niveau de l'argent de financement. Et l'exemple que tu viens d'évoquer est très édifiant, ça peut nous servir. Mais avoir des magasins, des appartements, ça relève des activités commerciales. Est-ce que l'organisation de la société civile, on est autorisé à faire des activités commerciales? Ensuite, je voudrais te demander, nous sommes des contribuables dans nos États. Que la part des financements de l'État, à partir du moment où nous sommes contribuables, pourquoi ne pas aussi demander que les États nous financent à partir de réglementations, de choses? Et enfin, vous avez dit qu'il y a des réseaux qui soutiennent par exemple Oxfam et autres. Quel est le lien entre ces structures-là et puis les réseaux mafieux pour blanchiment d'argent et autres? Est-ce que vous avez essayé d'étudier le cas pour voir s'il n'y a pas une manière déguisée de faire du blanchiment d'argent à travers ces structures-là et revenir Voici mes questions très précises. Merci.
Merci, mon frère. Ambassador, So we just go around this way. There were 4 tables that we had noticed hands.
Thank you. Mine is just a comment and then experience sharing. One about the issue Nana raised about fundraising, generating funds, assets. I find it very fascinating and very impressive. But when I look at it, she did mention East and Southern Africa have guest houses or projects that can help to sustain or generate finances for CSOs. But looking at it, I think it's only the foundations that can grant that. But I also look at it as some other critical aspect of it that they might say, when does the CSO become investors? But nevertheless, it's a very good, and I see it as very thinking out of the box. And again, I also buy that idea because when I was in Ghana, there's a splendid one guest house that time. It was set up by an individual, and some of us from CSOs, when we come from, we prefer staying there because of the cost. So I believe it has to be looked in and then to make sure so that they won't say that. And you raised some fundamental issues on the issue of collaboration, competition. We need to look that. I raised it yesterday, and that we don't have to work in silos. But finally, the issue of weaponization, of election weaponization, that's a very good one. We tend to see that contestation of election results have often been raised as one of the serious apprehensions, even in West Africa, even in other RECs. How do we go about it? And you fundamentally raised the issue of judiciary. I know, Madam, the chair didn't want to go into the epistemology or the reason. It's now generating a lot of controversy, the role of the judiciary and the way the executives are now pocketing the 2 other arms. So it seems to be a new way. And these are the areas which our head of states are not addressing. They are talking of unconstitutional change of government. But those are areas that are even leading. And that's why a few of them that have come out of offices now, when they go around, lead observation mission, those are the critical areas they tend to ask some of us technical staff that accompany them to look into. So it's a big issue with that word, because we tend to realize that election per se, as we just witnessed even in Gabon, and even more in West Africa here, more might be coming if the leaders don't change from these sit-tight issues, and then the issue of the fair and free and credible election, those terms, if we are not fully practicing it as it's supposed to.
Absolutely, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
Many thanks indeed. I'm going to come to the table in the middle. My sister, yes, you have a mic. Shem.
Good morning, everyone. Lovely conversation we've had here. I have a few interventions, a few thoughts I want to share as I heard the speakers share their stories and their experiences. The first thing we need to be honest with ourselves about is that there's a general mistrust for civil society among citizens. And I'll come back to our ability to tell our stories. We're not telling our stories well enough. And it's important we start to tell our stories honestly, quite honestly, and not try to make ourselves look better than we really are. You know, be honest with our weaknesses and be honest with the things that we need to do. About private sector partnership, I agree with you, Nana. Everything you said, so on point. But I think that for private sector to even start to think about investing, or philanthropists think about investing in the work that we just really also do civic space and democracy, is the fact that we've not been able to draw a nexus between democratic stability and their access to economic. That they use their homes, they also have a hotel, they use their house, also money to back into foundation. Just ensuring that schools are honest, collaborative, and they will like money to back into foundation. And I think that's where we start to make steps towards pushing the work that we're doing. Thank you so much.
Deux points. D'abord sur la question de l'autorégulation. Personnellement, je pense que c'est vraiment une piste extrêmement importante à engager. J'ai entendu mon frère parler du Sénégal comme d'un pays où on est fort dans l'autorégulation. Oui, il y a des dissolutions, donc il faut qu'on fasse attention. Mais en tout cas, oui. Mais toutefois, il y a besoin, me semble-t-il, de faire très attention sur ce chemin, parce que ça va être un chemin à construire, qu'il y a des prérequis pour engager de manière large l'autorégulation. Et il y a au moins deux choses. Premièrement, renforcer nos capacités propres à prendre une partie de ce que la justice de l'État faisait. Donc, si on se met à endosser ça, il faut qu'on ait la compétence, les capacités. Donc, oui, est-ce que nous les avons maintenant ou est-ce que c'est vraiment des étapes qu'il nous faudra construire? C'est extrêmement important pour être crédible, être capable de le faire. Et deuxièmement, endosser, il va falloir travailler sur les mentalités et que les populations les différents acteurs nous acceptent de nous voir endosser ce rôle sans que ce soit des jeux. J'ai vu au Sénégal justement à un moment donné quand les journalistes sont allés dans l'autorégulation, des politiciens et des commerçants venir beaucoup plus que des citoyens parce que ça les arrangeait. Donc il y a des manipulations qu'il va falloir surveiller. Et peut-être que la co-régulation peut être une étape à envisager. Donc il y a quelque chose à examiner là. Et surtout dans le contexte actuel qui est très, très compliqué. Très rapidement.
Désolé, ma sœur, veuillez résumer. Nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps.
D'accord. Rapidement, deuxième point très rapidement sur l'autofinancement. Il y a effectivement des règles que nous sommes données sur le droit de nous autofinancer. Mais il y a je pense qu'un principe simple que nous devons également élaborer, c'est que nous travaillons pour les communautés. Et les financements qui viennent des communautés devraient pouvoir rentrer dans la philosophie et les lois. Et nos commerçants dans les marchés, nous à l'époque, je travaillais pour l'Association mondiale des radios communautaires. Nous les avons invités. Et ils ont dit, mais nous n'attendons que ça. Nous ne savons pas où mettre l'argent. Donc, il nous faut aussi aller vers eux et les inviter dans nos réunions pour qu'ils viennent écouter, que nous fassions leur éducation. Il y a ce travail-là à faire. Il faut faire leur éducation. Après tout, les fondations américaines nous ont montré le chemin. Merci.
Je vous remercie, ma sœur. Mon frère, sorry, Your Excellency, I didn't see your hand up. I'll come back to you, sir. I have to take the hand I saw at that other table. My brother, thanks for your patience. Please keep it short. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think part of my questions have been highlighted by some of the previous speakers, but it has to do with the issue about whether we could also explore funding from government. Because I've heard arguments in certain quarters that point to the fact that if governments fund political parties who are aiming to be in government and civil society groups are also contributing to the public good, then why can't we explore how government can also fund civil society without compromising what we do? And when I talk about funding, I'm not talking about only financial, but in kind. So for example, if you go to a community to do a program, can you use a government facility to defray some of your costs? So I want the perspective of the panel on whether we could also explore government funding with certain laid down rules and procedures.
Thank you very much. Is there any table where no one has spoken who would like to speak? Otherwise, we'll come back on our second round. We're doing well with time. We should be able to do a second round. Your Excellency, you have 30 seconds, sir.
Moderator, in 30 seconds, it means I'll be speaking like fast track.
You can try, sir.
Okay. So
elevator speech, it is called. Elevator speech. Yeah.
So just to quickly contribute to issue of policy, capacity building, and resource mobilization. Regarding policy, the last speaker mentioned futures research. And it reminds me in the diplomatic side that in Europe in particular, especially the Scandinavian countries and Netherlands, they have this ongoing project on futures in diplomacy, which is similar to what she's appealing, because it's one of our major weaknesses in Africa in terms of knowledge. It is said that he who controls information.
Or she who.
Thank you. Thank you. But let me drop the he and say she who, because the future of Africa is on the shoulders of our women and the youth, not the men. I'm sorry to say so, the fellow men, because we have disappointed. But she who controls information, where information is processed, information, knowledge controls power.
Absolutely.
And that is, I think, what she's talking about. And then she also mentioned the issue of when you see a coup, what is underneath it? Because what is happening in West Africa is that many of us are seeing coup. But those who have monitored what has been happening in that particular Sahel zone will use that nexus lens and appreciate that it's more complicated than that. Yeah. The second point is to do with capacity building. I want to make an appeal that given the complexities in which CSOs in particular and our states are operating, there's the need to mainstream training in terms of understanding the dynamics of international relations and communication, diplomacy as CSOs. And I think you shouldn't take it for granted.
Absolutely.
The last one is to do with resource mobilization.
Right.
My brother mentioned the need for government contribution. Now, the biggest funder in Africa, some people call donor, the biggest donor in Africa is who? It is our diaspora. So let's look at how to tap that energy of funding in our diaspora in.
Absolutely.
Two, at the national level in West Africa, many of us don't seem to know. And yesterday I mentioned it, that in each of our member states, there's supposed to be a national committee on integration, which are not functional. And in that committee, non-state actors have a key role along with their state actors to ensure that integration takes place. Now, the member states at ECOWAS level pushed ECOWAS to take a decision. And again, many CSOs don't know this, that each member state retains 4.5% of the community levy collected by that state. For what purpose? For integration. If that committee is functional, you have a source of government funding, which is ECOWAS.
Absolutely.
Then, last.
I am absolutely sorry.
Thank you for thank you for your
Thank
generosity.
you indeed. Because you changed your preposition from a he to a she, I gave you 1 minute extra, you see. So I cannot do another minute, but, upon my honor, and I can see my sister Onye's hand is coming up as well, and that table hasn't spoken. But, we kind of gave you our word to use time well and to make this participatory. So I see another hand up there. I'm going to return to the panel. And my sister Malara, don't forget those online. Please let us know their thoughts there. We will then return, and my sister will go first, and the brother at the back would also go next. So you had a few questions that were already stewing, and now we have collected a few more from the audience. And I would like you as much as possible to tie this together. And I probably want to go in reverse order this time. Don't worry, we're making good use of time, so you don't have to look at your watch for your next meeting. My brother Peter, I'd like to start with you because of that, that point about the judiciary's come back again. And I know that some of us, some development partners are supporting civil society and even the judiciary to begin to use technology a bit more strategically to see how that can lead to speedy dispensation of justice. Is there something we can further look at in that particular space that we haven't exactly examined? Then back to that issue of the weaponization of elections, and the fact that certainly in Nigeria, the judiciary is left casting the last vote, after the citizens have cast theirs because they decide. And there's a disillusionment with that particular space. Are there certain kinds of policy standpoints or resources that you would want us to bear in mind at this particular point and to apply?
Well, basically for me, I think we need to give a lot of support to the judiciary from the civil society. beyond pointing fingers at them, beyond accusing them, we need to let them know they have a strong allies and people they can fall back on and talk to absorb the pressure from the executive. Because most often they are in the middle of all of this confusion and we leave them alone. They are left to themselves and they are not sure who is there for them or who is against them. So I think for me, first is to build that strong relationship with them. And I don't see so many of us in this space working with them. We work with all ministries and agencies, but very few CSO are working directly with the judiciary, either office of the Minister of Justice, Attorney General of Federation, Chief Judge of the Supreme Court. So I think we need to have that interface with them to be able to appreciate the challenges they go through and be able to give them that shoulder to lean on. And we're able to speak on their behalf too, beyond just pointing fingers at them and say, you're wrong, you're not doing it right. There's a lot of innovation with the recent justice administration in the country. And so we need to create massive awareness on that. And people should be able to take ownership of the process. People need to interrogate it and ensure it's working. It's something else to have a policy and law in place. It's another thing for that law and policy to be working. And it takes people to make it work. And that needs to happen. Now, talking about election, I think everybody seated here, whether you're from Nigeria or any part of West Africa, you agree with me that that has been a major challenge. Most often elections don't count. We only have a ritual, a tradition that people after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on your country, you go to the poll and then the government of the day most often decide. Very few instances where the opposition are able to win and are able to provide our services. So we need to ask ourselves, why are we missing that? What do we need to do right? And getting it right means that we need to create that massive awareness that those pennies and pounds and kobo we collect and naira from those people doing election don't matter most at the end of the day. Because when you do a simple analysis and calculation of the money times 4 years, you find out that you not only shortchange yourself, you sold your life out, and then we now start crying out. We need to reduce the expensive nature of election and the benefit that people get out of office. The last time the Senate president talks about prayers for the Senate members, it generated a lot of confusion around the country. He said it was just a prayers for 2 million. Some of them said they didn't get the money. But in the same country where people don't have enough money to buy the basic food of life, the usual food in northern part of Nigeria that is maize, a major is like 800. By the time you grind it and do it, you're spending like 2,000 to have a food in your house. A lot of people don't have it. And then somebody's having a weekend allowance for sitting in the office for twice or thrice in a week. And so all of this. So I think there are a lot we need to do. But quickly, let me just respond to the issue of funding. I'm 100% certain that in several states in Nigeria, under the Ministry of Women Affairs and the Ministry of Youth and Youth and Sport, there are specific budgets that are allocated for CSO. Under the Ministry of Women Affairs, most of that budget goes to the the office of the first lady or wife of the governor. Yet it's budgeted under the CSO. But we don't ask questions. Nobody asks about that 10 million, 50 million that have been allocated in the budget for us. And so is government is giving, but the money is going to the wrong purse. Or they recycle the money in our names and other people eat it. So I think we need to ask those questions. And I think Oyebisi is in position to help us in that direction.
To that and more. Thank you, my brother, Peter. So let me come again to my sister and ask my sister Denise, the question about investment and the concern that maybe we're not going to be able to draw the line between a not-for-profit and a for-profit. I know that there are techniques. The MacArthur Foundation will give you 29%, of whatever funding that you get for the work. And that 29% is like your liquid unspecified net assets to do exactly what Nana was talking about. The Ford Foundation has a build grant, which is also about institutional strengthening. So there are actually ways in which, yes, foundations are already thinking about strengthening the organization, which is the subtext of what I hear you say, that we must strengthen the vehicle itself for the work to be sustainable. But is it that we're not probably understanding a lot of how the fact that even we development partners want to hear from our grantee partners and we're learning every day? There's the assumption that everything is finished from overseas and it's not responsive. But from what you said, it can be responsive. And I thought you were talking about impact investment, yes, which is that it's not you investing. It is that an OSF can't have an investment plan with a development partner where, it's money you pay back, but it's money you get when you need it, because MacArthur also does impact investment. So can you help clarify that a little bit more and talk about some of the flexibilities that exist for us to all learn together?
Okay, so with regards to our impact investment, which is the Soros Economic Development Fund. So it normally works along with the foundations. So the strategies of the foundation is what they use to identify either businesses or organizations that are doing impactful work. So sometimes it could be a company that is working on maybe generating during COVID, the gas for people to breathe, you see that with communities, like they were not able to get that gas, and a lot of communities died as a result of that. So if you have a company that's generating that, and then you'll give them, it could be an investment for up to 10 years. But what also happens is that this company needs to try and pull in other investors, so that this is a big investment and they can work through. But the beauty of the funding is that it's a more forgiving fund, and it allows you to make the mistakes, to learn, and it takes you to the next level. And one of the most interesting impact investment projects that happened, or that I also learned that Open Society funded, was one in South Africa called O-Life. So this was an insurance company where no one wanted to insure people with HIV, right? And they gave them the funding to start that. And as a result of this company is now funding the people with HIV are literally running this organization because they give the contributions and it's actually running on its own. So that's how impact investment work, that it's now supporting the sector. So it's like it's inclusive, having the inclusion of people that are normally excluded in space. It's just that this is a business. But then also in the democratic space, I think it's important. I like what one of the panelists said. Can we draw that link, right? What is the link between the work that we're doing and the profit that actually companies can actually get at the end? So some foundations, they actually fund civil society organizations, but I think it's important to really bring that link to say, in the democratic and governance space, how can we bring that link? So in spaces like in other sectors like education and water sanitation, it's easier, right? Because everyone knows we need water and we need to go to school. But then in terms of the democratic space, sometimes there's like this blurred line. Others say we don't want to get involved in politics. We don't want this and that. But like, how can we actually bring the story or tell the story right to say this is what we want to do? And then lastly, around government funding, we also wanted to say like, it's correct that government in other instances, they do fund. We've also been seeing this, for example, in Zambia. We work with an NGO. They are supporting, so we give the initial funding for the pilot of supporting a monitoring tool for the government funds. Right. And they're developing this when they're working along with the government. And the idea is that they start this institution with our funding, but in the long run, they will then have to ask the Treasury to actually fund the running of this vehicle or this tool. So it's almost like it's that long-term thinking to say, we might give you the initial start, but let's start looking at other avenues, the government, the private sector, and everyone else to ensure that we sustain the sector.
Absolutely. Many thanks, my sister Denise. And I'll come to, because I'm looking at the time, I'll come to my brother Oyebisi. And you had a question earlier about how civil society should respond to repressive, policies. But now something has been added about, the question I had posed to you innocently, about whether we should self-regulate and the fact that there should be some capacity building before we self-regulate. But should we be taking government's money if we're trying to stay independent? This is the other controversial question I want to pose to you so that you can take it all together and respond.
All right. So let me crave the indulgence of the room to say after this, I'll have to run off, because within the context of our conversation on closing civic space, I have seen an advocacy moment to be able to speak to the Presidential Committee on Tax Reforms. If your space will be shrunk today, there are two major laws that I'm afraid of. One will be those around terrorism, and the second will be around taxes. And this connects to the conversation on investments. because your non-profit nature is actually conferred on you by that tax exemption status. And the taxman would want to know whether you are doing business and would use that to judge whether to tax you or to exempt you. All right. So the conversation on investments becomes very much important and how that relates to our non-profit nature. But having said that also is the need for us to now declare a non-profit tax. VAT, as you heard, zero-rated tax. What does that mean to the ability for non-profits to raise more resources? So these are conversations I'll be having in the next 5 minutes with that committee, just to quickly begin to have those kind of conversations. But now coming back into should we be receiving government money? It's a tricky conversation because the money many of us receive today comes from another government. But is government actually giving to civil society? A recent research we just did shows that government is actually giving. Lagos State, for instance, has a SDGs fund, which they've given about 25 non-profit organizations to do some work within SDGs. The Ministry of Women Affairs also provides funding to civil society. However, the transparency around the selection is where we have concerns at the moment. Then also where ministries where you have these resources, the trend we are seeing is that they have incentivized these as a means of registration. So they tell you, if you want to be able to use our facilities, then you must register with us. Then we are seeing some subnational level regulations, coming upstream. Of course, added to that is the fact that at the subnational level, Decree 12 of 1974 is still being used by some states in Nigeria to regulate the space. Decree. Again, that speaks to the need for us to now start thinking about non-profit lawmaking and research, such that we're able to understand, and that's why I go back to the definition of civic space, to say we're looking at regulations, policies, and laws that helps us to claim fundamental rights. Association, expression, and assembly. So how do we ensure that we pay attention to those laws? 3-4 months ago, there's a donor regulatory agency bill that surfaced on the floor of the National Assembly in Nigeria. And it's meant to determine the eligibility of an organization that can be called a donor agency. Yes. The analysis of that, or the interpretation of that to my understanding is that, philanthropists can now be said, no, you're not a donor agency, so you can't give to civil society. How are we paying attention to some of these laws? And coming back to self-regulation, the challenges with self-regulation is the transparency temperament of senior leadership within non-profits will determine whether they want to self-regulate or not. And that's a big challenge. And that speaks to the behavior that we now need to start working on. Plus also bringing that back to the capacity conversation around when you say self-regulation. We need to understand that there are different layers of self-regulation. There's a code of conduct, there's a certification, there's a working group, and we must find ways around which one would work best for us. Having said that as well, is to now start talking about the issues of public trust. Yes, we do agree there are concerns around our work, and we need to address that. Statutory regulation provides an opportunity for us to address that. Self-regulation also provides us with an opportunity. But recall that when I started, I said there are anti-regulation non-profits and there are, pro-regulation non-profits. And within the contestation that exists within civil society, we must have that understanding. Not all of us would favor either statutory or self-regulation. And we must continue to respect the rights of citizens to also freely associate. What that then tells us is that whether we like it or not, we can't continue to treat civic space as just a civic space. It is not my business. It is everybody's business. And we must now program for it and program for it differently. Advocacy for civic space, like I did say yesterday, requires balancing confrontation with collaboration. A good example, if Oyebisi had yapped everybody on the presidential committee that I needed to speak to today, to just seize 5 minutes of being able to tell them, these are the challenges my sector have with non-profit tax. It is ambiguous. We need to be clear on how to go about this process. But if government decides to say we want to fully do our work without witch hunting, they are swearing by the Bible, by the Quran, and by Ifa, new civil society organizations will be closed in Nigeria today. So there's that need for us to balance the tension with our rights.
Absolutely.
And also ensuring that we're engaging properly.
Absolutely. Many thanks indeed, my brother. I gave you my word that you leave at 10:20, but I also didn't want to interrupt you, but you still got 8 minutes to set up your meeting to meet with the presidential retreat team, because you'll be protecting our interests there as well. Many thanks to you and the NNNGO team for your excellent insights. Let's continue to dialogue and to work within this marketplace that is the civic space. Thank you so much. Please, a warm round of applause for my brother as he exits. My sister, can I ask you to please just move over? My sister Nana, I'm going to come to you next. Yesterday, we had said that democracy and development must go together. And the point has been reiterated again today in terms of what is it we think we're doing that is important, and how does it connect to the everyday person on the street to understand what's changing for their lives. You had a question earlier also about the kinds of engagement that we need to deal with in the civic space around even engaging the military. Should we begin? Because the point has been made, we ourselves need to understand government 101. How does government function? How does the private sector give or not give? How do we deal with some of the tensions around, and you raised that point, around people's perception that we are toxic, so they don't want to come near us, you know. Should we also be engaged in the military? That's a question that you had waiting, but people were quite excited about all what you said around the fact that we can raise our money. And Chichi asked yesterday. So Chichi, before you came in the room, were saying that, yes, Ford can take a break. We will find money from elsewhere. Just kidding. We're not there yet. Well, my sister, you have the mic. Is there, you can have this.
Thank you very much. Yes, I do think that it's important for us to consider collaboration with different segments of society. Because when we talk about the civic space, we are all in the civic space. And it does, the impacts that we feel being part of the civic space affects many different groupings within the space. As non-governmental organizations working in this space, there are certain times and periods when you would have to work with other groups that may be non-traditional. They are not the conventional groups that you work with. And even in Niger, the break that ECOWAS had recently it wasn't through civil society, it was through regional religious groups and leadership that they got the opportunity to engage. So we have to look at what the issues are that we are dealing with at each particular time, and which group or constituency do we need to work with to address the issues that are affecting the people. So for me, that is what we should be looking at. And sometimes it may have to be the military. Recently, last week, and SA is here, we were in Kenya at one of the projects that we are working on with other groups. And one of our colleagues in, the groups in Burkina Faso who work on community philanthropy were very clear that they had to find ways to engage the military in Burkina Faso to enable them do their work. Because otherwise the communities would suffer, because they will not have the access to do the work that they needed to do. So I believe that there are times that we have to ask ourselves, how do we engage in the interest of the people? And because we are part of when we say people, we are also the people, but we are speaking on behalf of certain groups. And I think that sometimes we have to engage them. And it's the same thing when it comes to the private sector and who we work with in the private sector. There was a question that came up when I had said that we have to work with high net worth individuals, and that sometimes they may not want to be known publicly as the ones supporting the work. And there are ways of doing that. There are funds that could be set up. I know that our late brother, Innocent Chukuma, he was an advocate of looking at how we could engage high net worth individuals in an effective manner, and without them, having any backlash from government or anything like that. And I think these are some of the conversations that we need to look at. We may need to look at the context that we are working in to see what suits the context. But of course, we mustn't go against any anti-money laundering laws and regulations, look at the issues around counterterrorism financing. But there are ways around this. And I think we need to think about it and work through what could be done. I want to also endorse all that has been said about telling our stories, about building trust. People will not give you that. Person selling corn in the streets will not take her if it's in Ghana, 1 cedi, if it's in Nigeria, 1 naira, to give to you if they don't trust you. If they don't believe that they are part of what you are doing or own what it is that you are doing. And I think that is one of the areas where we haven't done very well in telling our story and in, building that trust for the ordinary average citizen to actually feel a part of what we are doing as NGOs, and for them then to give us their money if we are asking for support, or their time, because it's not only money, other things that they could also give. So those are some of the areas that I think, I wanted to talk about. And I want, Oyebisi is gone, but the tax issue that he talked about, there's a need for us to look at our tax policies for it to incentivize local philanthropy. And I think that that's one area that we need to think.
Many thanks indeed, my sister. I'm looking at our time and we have just 17 minutes to go, but we can use those very effectively. My sister Oyinye is not in the room. I did give her my word she was going to go next. So if she does come back, I would like to redeem myself. But we had a brother, mon frère. Je vous cède la parole. Who wanted to speak earlier?
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is William Dari. My question is, how do we sustain all these discussions we have discussed so far? Because everything centered on working together, collaboration, and how to build a well solid society. And then after we have done all this, is there any mechanism we are putting in place to follow up that this thing is followed up to the to the last letter, so that we will not come back maybe after next year or 2 years time, we come back again, we are still talking about how do we work together, collaborations. So what mechanism? Because most of us, we have left some of the things we are doing. We are here for over 3 days. After this program, what next? Thank you.
Do you have a suggestion? Because, we had said this conversation must be to the point and...
Yes, what I mean is that, is there any mechanism we are putting in place?
Is there a mechanism you would like to propose? I'm going to pose that to the panel. And this is not just from my brother, William, in case there's any thought coming from the audience online and in here as well. I see Daniel at your table. Egbon, grab the mic and speak. I borrow my brother Williams's mic, if possible.
All right. Good morning. So from what my colleagues say here, I think I will just propose some few things. I noticed I was throughout the event, I've been having conversations with most of our technicals there, and I was able to ask some of our interpreters and all of that. And from what I observe is mainly for CSOs in the area of how do we deal with language barriers as well. And I would say this, that I think is on our own part in our organization. I think CSOs should do more of working with language training. What are they doing with in the aspect of understanding languages? That's in the cross part of knowing that, okay, I can be very comfortable when I understand this person in particular to form a kind of coalition or whatsoever, so as to establish as we go on. That's my own take.
Merci, mon frère. Donc, il faut parler français. Commencez ça. So it's important you then begin to speak French.
Exactly.
You know,
to
exactly
train,
on
yeah.
cellular strategy.
To train ourselves, yeah.
Exactly.
Not just...
Well, thank you very much. It's a very valid point. I have to take Oyeye. She's back in the room. Then I'll come back to that table once Oyeye has had her say.
Okay, I just thank you. I don't know if my comment has been overtaken.
You never know. Just
okay. So I was just going to say that we tried something during COVID-19 in the region, which was why the prophecy that was, talked about didn't come to pass. People mobilized, people looked for resources within the community. We saw the private sector came into full action. Perhaps we need to study what worked during that period and see what it is that we can learn from it in terms of raising community funding and the accountability mechanisms also, because we saw the Indomies that were meant for people packed in a store, such that we don't also replicate that type of attitude. But yeah, I wanted to put it out.
Thank you very much. And I think we have time to take vous avez parlé avant mon frère, two hands. My sister at that table, and then yes, my sister at this table, Chichi as well.
I want to tour the route of a future and of financial mobilization for organizations, the NGOs, to have a sustaining, work through their finances. So, what I wish one of the panelists is around.
See who was left.
Is around. What I want to suggest, when these organizations, the funders who are interested in funding institutional support, when these monies are gotten and an organization, an NGO decides to, invest it in buildings that will as well fetch income for the organization, for resource mobilization, for the work that or funding that they have. So my suggestion is there's actually a lot that civil society does that the private sector needs, but both don't know that. So I'll just give an example. If we look at a lot of the policies that we have today in government, were one way or another facilitated by civil society.
Right.
If you look at the policies in education, health, whatever, civil society was behind it. But then you find that when it comes to business, the business sector is always groaning that the policies are not favorable, that the ease of doing business is not there. But civil society has not thought, well, this is an opportunity for us. We're good with doing policy with government. The private sector is not very good with doing policy. They complain, they wait until the policy comes out and then they start complaining. But civil society can actually come in at that point in time to say, okay, let's work with the private sector to be able to help government design the types of policies that are reasonable and favorable to them. So it becomes a win-win. The private sector is willing to pay for such an intervention because it is going to be reducing their risk and it's going to increase their profit. So you're talking their language now. And then the government, who are not good at doing policies, then have an ally, somebody who's in the back door helping design this policy. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have to start thinking outside of the box. If we're going to expand our funding base, don't just think, I'm just going to go to these people and collect money. Just think about what can I take to them? How can we do it so that it's a win-win for everyone?
I couldn't agree more. Incentivization is crucial. We've done 2 rounds of questions. We've done 2 rounds of our panel speaking, and I'd like to have the chance to also reiterate some of the important things we've talked about today. But before then, I'd like to give 1 minute each to the members of the panel. You heard strategic things, and I want you to just choose what you respond to. In your case, Nana, because WACSI is one of the co-organizers with WADMOS and the Hub, to the question that William had posed about sustainability, let's even begin. And my brother has also asked a question about Niger again. Are we going to have a statement out of this meeting to talk about the Niger situation, the Gabon situation, and what we especially think about the entire closed civic space? It might be a communique, it might be something stronger, something more of a position. Are we going to have that? So I'd like to speak to that. And I think I would therefore like to begin with you, and then this time close with my brother.
Thank you. Yes, I think that we would propose a statement that comes out of this meeting on what we think about the civic space, the issues, and how the response that is needed. So we will propose that, and we would circulate it and have a discussion on it. On sustainability, my brother William, the CSR-Hub, he's not, hello. The CSR-Hub is a resource tool for all of us to work on the civic space issues. And some of the ideas that are coming out of here would feed also into the work that we are doing in the Hub. We will hear a lot more about the Hub in the coming sessions, so I don't want to dwell on that. Yeah. And then there are platforms. WADMOS, the West Africa Democratic Solidarity Network, is another that we could look at how we are going to build solidarity going forward. And I believe that we have to advocate strongly for the ECOSOC at the ECOWAS level. And that is something that all of us have to be, more informed about and engaged with together. Yeah.
Okay, so from my side, I'll say strategy. Let's come up with a strategy, a plan, and do the hard thinking. It's difficult to sit and think in a room, but it's important as well, because if we do not think hard enough, ask those questions, it's going to be difficult for us to get the right answers that we want. So sometimes when you ask the wrong questions, you probably get the wrong answer, right? So if you ask the right questions, and so this calls for thinking workshops, dedicating, if it means it's a retreat, going out and thinking, asking the right questions, finding out our stakeholders, with what we want to do, who are our stakeholders, what influence do they have, and what should we do with this particular group of people. So if it means that if it's the military, what influence do they have? Do we need to speak to them? So let's do that. And then just to round off, the organization I mentioned, Riasako, they did an article that I will share with the team just to highlight what systems thinking and futures looks like, just to give the team just what it is and how we can start implementing it.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of societies, states and nations are functioning today because of the civil society. And we must appreciate the value and contribution we bring to stability in several of the countries where we come from. And I'll just urge us that let's keep pushing. It's not easy. At times it seems as we are not making progress, but I assure you that we're changing those narratives. For me, I think it's only foolish birds that collide in the air. There is space for everybody to succeed. And if we're able to work as a team, as a network, as collaborators, it will help all of us to succeed. So let's keep pushing those bars and ensure that we're supporting each other. Thank you.
For bringing in the voices from online. And I saw one about a corpse versus a coffin. Sometimes that's all the wood you have. What do you then do about expanding the coffin? So it's just being more strategic and changing the shape of the coffin. Maybe you can get more happening there. Abundance of caution that we're not readjusting the problem rather than fixing the problem. Yes, I think part of the conversation today, we've looked at the fundamental problems and the opportunities. And yes, the shrinking civic space is something we need to look at. And that's probably the point I'd like to begin with as I look at our last 3 or 4 minutes left for this conversation. We have had a debate the last 3 days about whether the civic space is shrinking or it's not shrinking. But what has not been in contention is the fact that it is changing. And we're saying that we need to pay attention to the nature of the change. Sometimes they're positive changes, sometimes they're negative changes. And this particular panel has been focused on looking at policies, looking at tools, looking at resources. And I just want to remind us of some of the clusters that have emerged. And I've also added to that some sustainability issues that we've talked about. In terms of policy, we have we're coming towards an agreement that we will need to self-regulate. It's important that we activate that aspect of who we are and not wait for the laws to catch up with us, but to keep the laws and to self-regulate ourselves. But to do that, we shouldn't assume the capacity is there. We need to enhance the ability to understand this concept. What is self-regulation and how do you regulate? What is the best way to do? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? Second is that we need to pay attention to influencing policy at all levels. And as we're influencing policies, we need to think about new partnerships, one of them being private sector, and how to incentivize private sector, such that we're not waiting for policies to be made, but we're actually anticipating the dynamics of a particular policy at its standpoint and trying to address that and making the most of it. There continues to be, and this is the third thing under policy, that nexus between democracy and development is very important. We cannot sit in this room and talk about all the English language and the French that we can speak of, but people will ask about water, they will ask about agriculture, and we have to be able to make the connect as much as possible. Otherwise, people do not see our value and they're not going to trust us. So the issue of mistrust will continue to happen. And we need to find the humility, as the fourth, to remember that we're not alone in this space. We're just a few of the birds in the sky. And the sky is wide enough for so many birds. We need strategic thinking. The future study that has been talked about, the scenario building, we need to ask ourselves the hard questions. What is the civic space? Does that definition itself even needs to change? What is civil society? Who are the other players on the space? We need to keep our eyes on certain laws that might shrink that space that we're talking about as much as possible. Then I go quickly to the tools as well that we want to talk about. CSR-Hub itself is a tool that we need to explore a whole lot more. Telling our stories, storytelling and telling it honestly, that is a tool. The National Committee on Integration of ECOWAS is a tool that we have not used effectively enough, and we need to focus on that. The diaspora is not just a tool, it's also a resource that we have access to. Government resource is a possibility, it's already happening. We're taking USAID's money. Someone said it's government money. Government 101, we need a curriculum on understanding how governments work in our states, in our societies, in our systems, so that we know how to better engage, including the military. We must take advantage of advocacy movements and policy movements like Oyebisi went to do on our behalf now. We cannot fight all the time. We must collaborate, we must work together, but we also must never lose the capacity to speak truth to power. And finally, I'll come quickly to the issue of resource. We need to examine what we mean by resources. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it is not money. Most times probably not. But there are local resources that we need to do an audit of to understand better and to see how we can use that effectively. You can't do not-for-profit and still save money. There's something called social enterprise. And maybe the hub should have a conversation on social enterprise going forward. There's impact investment. OSF, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Luminate, I don't know who else is in the room. We need to have a conversation on impact investment. It is not well understood, whereas it's a very powerful tool waiting there to support the work that we do as much as possible. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. It's very important, but there has to be trust built. We have to understand the organic nature of collaboration. That is how it works. And we have to think about intergenerational mentoring. It's not just we, the older generation, telling the younger generation what to do, but a generation of knowledge, of learning, of trust needs to happen. Each generation can actually bring ideas. And of course, I've talked about auditing what resources we have at the community level. The last thing I'd like to speak to about sustainability is the point that was made about language and how we ourselves make effort to develop ourselves. We have to read. We have to shift. Our mindset has to change. Even, basic communication, hello, how are you, and all of that, it opens doors. We need to pay attention to that. It's very important. Accountability is also something that has been raised here many times. Whatever we do, one of our strengths is that we're able to demand for accountability, and we cannot stop doing that. And we as donors, when I say we now, we're in a different hat. I'm not moderator now again. I'm talking as a donor. I think we need to de-emphasize attribution to allow for collaboration. It doesn't matter if one organization achieves it. We should not be excited when one organization achieves it. We should say, who have you worked with? maybe you could have been able to do a whole lot more. That's very, very important. And communication and learning and evaluation must be an integral part of the kind of grants that we make. And the final point I'd like to make around collaboration is that we need to look at bigger organizations that have gone ahead of their game and intentionally ask that they mentor younger organizations, twinning. That way it can be a deliberate strategy from donor organizations, to grow the space as much as possible. And of course, mental health. This is a very important thing to invest in because this work is very, very hard. And at this point, I must stop because we are at time. I'd like to thank my excellent panel. Please a warm round of applause. Colleagues online, thank you very much for your contribution. And may the dialogue continue and may the space continue to expand inclusively. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please, can we give them another round of applause as we have a panel picture? Thank you, Madam Chair, Nana, Denise, Gad, and Oyebisi. Thank you so much. To take the picture? Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay, no, it's at the top. What's up today? Sorry. So it's time for tea break and it's served outside. We'll start the next section in the next 10 minutes. So if we can just stretch our legs and bring in our coffee and snacks, and we can go into this CSR-Hub that we've mentioned a couple of times since we started. What exactly is the Civil Society Resource Hub, Civic Space Resource Hub, pardon me, and what has it done? What is it doing? And what do we expect it to do more? I will be sharing more on that in the next section. Thank you.